The reset process has another name for it, but it's a name that triggers a lot of people. And it's forgiveness.
I've forgiven people that don't even know that they transgressed. It has nothing to do with them. It has to do entirely with me.
Peace is power and calm is control.
So narcissists and sociopaths, talk about that a little bit, if you will, because you get into this deep-seated fear and shame that they have to protect and hide.
Dr. Amen, our mutual friend you mentioned earlier, has looked at the brains of sociopaths, and they are different brains. I think it's possible for narcissists with a lot of deep work and very deep work to possibly heal and to become healthy. But I don't know if that's possible for sociopaths. But if you have either one and heavily meditated, in the chapter on this, I talk about what do you do about it. And the most important thing to understand is if you have someone gaslighting you or treating you with these patterns, it creates an injury. We'll call it a spiritual injury in you that is just as important as if you got whiplash in a car accident. And you want to heal your emotions and your spirit if you dealt with narcissistic abuse. And it happens way more often in the workplace or in our relationships than people recognize. And it makes you question your reality. And that's a good sign that that's what's going on.
With regard to sociopaths, I'm not saying there aren't exceptions to every rule, but this is the one group that I've found tend to actually, typically, frequently at least, get worse in therapy rather than better. And the reason I say that is because what they do is they don't have the ability to be empathetic. They don't actually have genuine feelings. And what they do is they learn from the therapist how to mimic those behaviors through role playing and modeling. And so they go, oh, that's how you do that. So now they go out and they know how to sneak up and disarm people because they learn how to reflect feelings. They learn how to mimic empathy. And so they just become better at it and get closer to people where they can damage them more. So I found that therapy actually arms them to be more destructive. Not all, I'm sure there are exceptions, but the solutions that you talk about there, because you talk about reset and boundaries.
The reset process is at the core of 40 Years of Zen, this 5-day program that created the content for the book. And this is an 8-step process to turn off a trigger. So if someone you want to go through and run the reset process to undo the harm that they did to your sense of reality. And the reset process has another name for it, but it's a name that triggers a lot of people. And it's forgiveness. And when I say forgiveness, most people go, I'm not going to tell this bad person that I forgive them. I'm not going to say that what they did was okay. And neither of those is what forgiveness is all about. All forgiveness really is about turning off the trigger that person installed in you so that you're no longer reactive to them. So there's no energy, good or bad, towards them, to remove all of it. And it's interesting. You look at the different religious traditions, forgive them, they know not what they do. Well, we can always say, oh, I forgave that person who was mean to me. But forgiveness isn't a thought. Forgiveness is a feeling in your body. And we can measure it in your brainwaves, but you feel it mostly in your heart. And it turns out there's an 8-step process to go in and fully forgive that person, which means you still never talk to them again. You never told them or anyone else you forgave them if you don't want to. But what you do is you just see the situation for what it is, and you teach your nervous system that that's not going to be a problem anymore. And when that happens, instead of saying things like, I dealt with a narcissistic abuser for a long time, and you're just carrying all that pain all the time. It's like a huge, heavy backpack you're dragging around. Forgiveness or the reset process lets you set that down so that it's just not there anymore, and you're free. And I did 6 months of this kind of work over the last maybe 15 years to find every single trigger I could find in my life and go through and reset it So that anytime I saw myself as a victim, then I realized, okay, I wasn't a victim. The person did something. They did it because they were a narcissist, because of what their parents did to them, or whatever the reasons are. But once you don't think about this, but you feel about it and you set yourself up in the right way, it just doesn't bother you anymore. And I share some pretty personal stuff in the book. I've lost more than $100 million because of this kind of behavior. And I had a family member try to steal one of my companies out from underneath me. Things that were incredible betrayal and injustice. You talk about victims. The two big traumas that adults face quite often in life are those. Someone that you trusted betrayed you. They intentionally harmed you for their own benefit. Man, you will never trust the world again until you forgive that or you reset that, so that you realize, okay, that person did it for whatever reasons they did it, but they didn't do it to you. They just did it, but you got the lesson and you're not going to let it happen again. And that returns you to being able to be trusting and peaceful. Otherwise, you spend the rest of your life without any peace.
You talk about an 8-step process and how this is something that people do internally. They're going to need to study this and spend some time on how to reset themselves and exercise some reprogramming and taking back their power and setting some boundaries, of course. But talk about one or two things that are involved in people truly exercising forgiveness. And again, you and I agree that it has nothing to do with the other person. I've forgiven people that don't even know that they transgressed. It has nothing to do with them. It has to do entirely with me. But talk about it so people understand what power they have. Talk about a couple of examples.
Here's a really common thing that I'll help people reset when they're just learning. Everyone gets mad when someone cuts you off in traffic. So you're driving and they just cut in front of you. And I know that there was a time in my life where the biggest muscle that I had was probably my middle finger.
Yeah.
And because this would get under my skin. Well, the story we tell ourselves, which is not real, is that they did it because they think they're more important than us. They could have been on the way to the hospital to deliver their baby or to see someone in their last moments. You just don't have any data whatsoever other than that they did this. They didn't do it to you. They just did it. But the story that your nervous system is going to tell you is very big. So what you do when you're doing the reset process is you sit down and you imagine this person sitting across from you and you say, all right, you cut in front of me. No, you did something. And you have to phrase this very carefully. And it made me feel. And then you identify however it made you feel. And once you do that, then you actually turn on the feeling in your body that you experience. So if your jaw tightened, then you tighten your jaw. Right? And you kind of re-experience the discomfort for no more than 2 minutes. And the reason you're doing this is you're showing your body and your nervous system, this is what you're working on. So you have to re-experience the feeling just a little bit. Then, and this is the hard part for most of us, you cannot forgive something without gratitude. Gratitude's like a spark that lights the fire of forgiveness. So what's the one good thing that happened because that person cut in front of you? Well, maybe they got to go to the hospital on time, or maybe they saved you from getting in a car accident, or maybe it gave you time to do something. You have make up something. It can be the tiniest little thing, but your nervous system will not let you let go of something unless you can find gratitude. And it can be the tiniest little thing. So you find something to be grateful for. And then, only then, after you felt the feeling and you found gratitude, you move into what ultimately becomes compassion. But you put yourself in the other person's shoes and you go, why would they be doing this? Right? And maybe the person just had a bad breakup. Maybe they were drunk. Maybe you can go on and on and on. And you just realize this is just a flawed human being sitting across from you. And they didn't do anything to you. And they're running their own story. And you just, at a certain point, you feel your heart opens. And when I'm training people with brainwaves, we see the shift in their brainwaves right when that happens. And if you're not hooked up to a computer, it's like this glowing feeling around your heart that just kind of opens up. And there's a lot of instructions in the book to get there. But when that happens, all of a sudden your whole perspective shifts. And you don't just think about it shifting, you feel your body change. And the next time someone cuts you off, you don't have the reaction you did before. Like, oh, look, they cut me off. And you don't lay on the horn. You don't tailgate them. You just don't want to because it didn't matter. It just felt like it mattered before. So now you're more connected to reality than you were because the nervous system filter to make you feel anger that wasn't serving you, it went away.
That's so well said. Thank you. Homeowners, when's the last time you checked on your home title? If your answer is never, then this is for you. Scammers are stealing titles and your equity is the target. Criminals forge your signature and just like that, your home title can be transferred out of your name. That's why I partnered with Home Title Lock, so you can find out today if you're already a victim. Use my promo code Phil at HometitleLock.com and you'll get a free title history report. Plus, you'll get a free trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title. Urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud does happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to fix it. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code Phil. I think what I want people to understand out of that is that when we talk about rewiring and resetting, we're not talking about them becoming neurologists. What we're talking about is when they have a different relationship with themselves, when they have a different internal dialogue, and you said something earlier about writing it down. We have different modes. And when we output, when we have to actually write something down, it does two things. That's a different production mode, which gives us some distance from it. It also allows us to revisit it because we will forget it within 3 minutes sometimes. But if we write it down and put a date and time, we can go back and remember that. It's so powerful to write it down. But you just walked through some things that people can do, and it's the doing of that engages the brain differently and causes the brain to engage in different ways. That does cause the brain to start to rewire, does cause the brain to have a different reactivity. And you said, I'm going to find something to have gratitude about. You give some examples in the book because people will sit there and think, well, I don't know what to look at or what to put on the list. But if you give them a few examples, then they can start to feel, okay, I get it now. I know what you're talking about. I've always said, if you're going through the checkout line at the grocery store and somebody is just consensually rude, if 100 people would go through, they would all agree that person was an asshole. They were completely rude. There's no doubt everybody would agree. If I can get people to say, look, describe that situation, but take anger out of the sentence and replace it with hurt, fear, or frustration. Instead of saying that person was angry, you have to describe it, but you can't use the word anger. You have to use the word that person was hurt, or that person was afraid, or that person was frustrated. Anger is just the outward manifestation of hurt, fear, or frustration. And if you say, well, that person was really in pain, or that person was really afraid of something, or they were really frustrated, then you react in a completely different way. If you are any kind of a healthy person, then you have to start having some empathy. Like that maybe that person just got off the phone and found out their mom just got diagnosed with stage 4 metastasized cancer. And so they're hurt and they're afraid and they're frustrated. They can have all three of those things. And so they come across as just, but if you can even entertain that they're experiencing hurt, fear, or frustration, instead of just reacting to the anger, if you look past that And I've always, maybe it's because of the profession, but I've always looked past the surface and asked myself, why is somebody showing me what they're showing me? What's behind it? Because anger and driving aggressively, road rage, whatever, what's behind it? If you could unscrew the top of their head and look in, it would probably scare you to death. And if you could think about it that way, even if you just said, I flashed in anger, at least they made me feel alive. I got out of my mundane life. And
they woke me up.
I have the ability to feel. I mean, thank you. It woke me up. I wasn't a great feeling, but at least it wasn't baseline. It wasn't mundane. When you start thinking that way, you rise above everything else in your day, and you say, that woke me up. Thank you. I have reflexes and I have the ability to feel. You can find something to be grateful for.
You can. And you said something so important. It's that anytime someone's angry, behind it, ultimately, there is fear. And it's not obvious. It doesn't look like that. But if someone else is angry and then they make you angry, that means they actually made you afraid, even though it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like anger. I used to believe that anger was a source of power. And certainly anger can give you some energy, but if you try to use anger as a power source, it will burn you up and you will have the most miserable life ever and the worst relationships. You can't rely on it. So the real form of power is peace, because peace means all your energy flowed where you wanted it instead of into anger and fear. And so peace is power and calm is control. And so if you're peaceful and calm, that other guy may be angry, but you didn't get afraid, you didn't get angry. You saw it exactly the way you described. Oh, look, that person's actually suffering. And if we can flip that script, you cannot be a victim of that person's anger if you have that mindset. But if you got angry, if you got triggered, then you can be a victim.
Give me your opinion of this. If you're feeling angry, doesn't it follow that you must feel that you've been victimized in some way?
I think you're right.
And therefore you've got your victim hat on and you're at your weakest because you feel like you've been victimized, traumatized.
Yes.
In some way betrayed, put upon. And so you're at your weakest.
You are at your weakest. And if someone did something, you're not a victim. If someone did something to you, which is what makes you angry, you're a victim. So you can see someone do really mean, horrible things, but if they're just doing them out of their own trauma and their own programming, whether they did them, quote, to you or not, it really wasn't about you, so you didn't take it on. And you say, I really wish they hadn't done that because that was inconvenient. But it didn't get to your heart. Your heart rate didn't change. You didn't ruminate. You didn't lose sleep over it. And you just did whatever it took to make the situation go away. You're in control. You're powerful when you do that. And you get to like the rest of your day.
Yeah, that's like you said, we were talking before about don't argue with a narcissist. If you do, you give them your power, they win, you lose. That's what they wanted you to do. And so they now control you and your day. They've made you miserable, frustrated, red-faced, and that's what they want. And, people's number one need in life is acceptance. Number one fear is rejection. I've always said I'm not, which works out great in my profession, but I'm not afflicted with the need to be loved by strangers. And that turns out to be really handy given what I do, because they grade my paper every day and publish the results. They put out the ratings every day, and you got to be, it's not for everybody.
Were you always like that, Dr. Phil, or did you do some work on yourself to get to that level?
I grew up, this will sound very cliche, but my dad was a violent alcoholic. And as we know, research-wise, when you grow up with an alcoholic parent, particularly an alcoholic father, you become very self-reliant very early on because you can't rely. I had a passive mother, wonderful woman, but passive mother, and an alcoholic father. So you become very self-dependent. And we were very poor, so you you never know when you come home, are your utilities going to be on? Is the car going to be in the driveway or crashed or repossessed or whatever? And so you become very self-reliant, and you get to where how my life goes is up to me. And what other people think or don't think is not going to determine whether I eat today or whether I have a roof over my head. And so that starts to pale in comparison to, literal survival. And I was homeless when I was 14 for a while, and then lived with my dad in an apartment with no utilities for 4 or 5 months. And I think it became what other people think is so far down the list of what matters that it just didn't make the top 100 on things like, am I going to have shoes? Am I going to have clothes? Am I going to have a way to get to school or whatever? And I think it got pushed off the radar screen so far, and it never came back. I grew up in a very results-oriented world, and you focus on what matters and what doesn't. And what somebody I don't know in Lincoln, Nebraska thinks about what I did that day on the show, I just, they've got a remote control. If they like it, great. If they don't, they got a remote control it. They can move on. And I grew up in athletics, which are very results-oriented. They don't care how much money you have or whether you wore designer clothes. They care, can you run fast, jump high, and knock somebody down? And so that was a great equalizer, but it was very results-oriented. And I grew up as a very empirical kid, and I've always focused on the scientific model and embraced that kind of treatment protocols, and it's kind of defined me, and nothing else seemed to matter near as much. That's been my internal dialogue.
Life showed you what really mattered early on, and you got the lesson.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's kind of stuck with me, and I think I've raised, along with my wife, my kids that way. She's much more emotional, and I'm much more cerebral. And she'll say something great will happen, and she'll say, "Give me something, give me a happy dance." And I'm like, I'm really feeling good inside. I just don't. I'm not as emotional as she is, but between us, we mix pretty well. We've been married 49 years.
Wow. So, congratulations.
Just last week we were married 49 years. We've been together 53, but married for 49. If you're 64 or older, this is important. Have you ever tried to pick a Medicare plan and felt like you were nailing Jell-O to a tree? Or visited the Medicare website and found it about as useful as a steering wheel on a mule? Yep, we've all been there. Medicare is confusing, and many of those helpful brokers only recommend plans that pay them the most. That's why you've got to talk to my partners at Chapter. They're the only advisors that compare every Medicare plan nationwide to find what's actually best for you. They've saved the average senior $1,100 a year. They'll even help if you're hit with wrongful medical bills. The best part, their service is free. They can review your options in under 20 minutes. Call 352-845-0659 to talk to an advisor today.
Well, this forgiveness practice we talked about, all right, how do you use forgiveness to stay married for 49 years?
Oh, listen, I learned a long time ago when she says, "What?" it doesn't mean she didn't hear you. She's given you a chance. She's given you a chance to change what you said, and you better take it, and you better take it right now. And you focus on whether she's going to forgive you or not. We've gotten along really well and given each other a lot of space across time. And I can say honestly, if we weren't married today, I would excuse myself from this interview and go find her and ask her. Wow. And being able to say that, I think, is a great victory.
That is rare and beautiful.
And I'm not sure what she would say, but I would go ask her for sure. And you know, I think we feel we feel safe in our relationship, and our kids feel safe in the relationship. And in chapter 3 of the book, you actually talk about that. You say the body must feel safe before anything else can happen. And Maslow talks about that as his first level of survival. You talk about that. I think it's been core in our relationship. People need to feel safe. Their body needs to feel safe. And
they do.
Why is that so central to your approach?
Heavily Meditated, very surprisingly, became the top-selling philosophy book in the US for a brief period of time, and not just meditation. And it was because of this idea that need for safety comes from your mitochondria inside your cells. All life on Earth is worried about being eaten by something else. So if we're doing it, it has to work inside the smallest unit of life inside us, which is these ancient bacteria that became a part of our cells. So we're running an ancient bacteria operating system, just like every tree, every slime mold, even every politician. They're all running this. If something is scary, you have to react now so you don't die. And since that happens before we can think, it's wired in. But you hit on something with what you just shared about your relationship that's also in the book. And it's that one of the ways of turning off fear is humor.
Yeah.
Right? So you made that joke about, kind of self-deprecating, but being able to just be curious, which will turn off fear, or to laugh and find something funny and something afraid. Both of those are immediate off switches for that deep sense thing of fear. And even if you're feeling angry, if you just step back a minute and go, oh my God, look at the story I'm telling myself. It's actually kind of funny. And any kind of humor will do that, except the kind that makes someone angry because you're poking them. That doesn't count.
Yeah. And if it's at your own expense, then it is, I think, useful. And, I have to say, as I've said, we don't respond to what happened. We respond to what we tell ourselves about what happened. And as I look back over my life, there's been trauma in my life, of course. I had 3 sisters, 2 have passed away. Both my parents have passed away. It's the cycle of life. Doesn't mean you like it, but it is the cycle of life. Growing up very poor, I have to say in retrospect, 2 things. I don't regret that. And I didn't mind it a lot at the time, because at the time, you don't know you got a bad deal. It's just... It's like if you've never driven in anything except a 58 Volkswagen, if you've never ridden in a Cadillac, you don't know the difference. I was in college and my roommate in the athletic dorm, the police came up and knocked on the door and said, hey, sorry, but you need to come downstairs. Somebody's vandalized your car. And we went down there and, he looked at it and said, no, no, it's fine. That's
how it always was.
Honest to God, he said, no, that's just my car. That's just my car. And we died laughing, but they honestly thought somebody had vandalized his car, but that was just his car. And we've talked about that since, and we didn't know it was a bad deal. It was like it got us over to McDonald's when we needed to go. You don't know at the time that it's a bad deal. That's just the way maybe other people would label it that know better. It's all in how you take it and label it at the time and afterwards. And I would not want, we have 2 boys that are now grown, married, and have kids and are very successful in terms of being healthy and happy and good citizens and good fathers, and we have great relationships, and I consider them really successful in every way in that regard. And I wouldn't want them to go through what I went through, but I don't regret it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all in what you say to yourself. You can whine and be a victim, or you can say, it taught me a lot, and I take the good and leave the bad and move on. And it's just kind of a philosophical approach to it, I guess. But people don't want to hear you whine no matter what they say to your face. So what's the point? You've got to take a constructive approach to it. And I think your brain is going to respond to what you say. And you put that in such reset terms for people, because I fear that we are raising and turning out a few generations here that are not equipped behaviorally, psychologically, or neurologically to deal with the full contact aspect of real life. And I think they're going to need everything that you're talking about in order to properly reset. I think Heavily Meditated is your most important book. The subtitle people need to know is The Fast Path to Remove Your Triggers. And that's so important, because you're not saying how to cope with your triggers. You're saying remove your triggers, dissolve stress, and activate inner peace. And that's very different than coping with your triggers. I know that's just in the subtitle, but it is very different than coping. It is saying remove these triggers so you don't have to contend with them every day. I've seen it all, from folks stuck in toxic relationships to people whose houses look like a tornado went through a craft store. But there's one problem I see plaguing America, and it ain't on the couch. It is the couch. Hideline offers customizable leather options so you can pick the color that fits your style. They've got specialized hybrid foam and pocketed coil cushion systems to help you sit comfortably for hours. For a limited time, you can get 10% off store-wide and free shipping with code Dr. Phil 10 at hideline.com.
It's funny, you mentioned, if you always had that wreck of a car, you wouldn't know better. A lot of young people grew up in a world where you think it's this way, and it's always been this way, where if you're triggered, it's someone else's fault. Right? And if that's your view, and if you learn that from your parents, you learn that from your teachers, whatever, you're going to think that's the way the world is, until one day you realize there might be a different way, but you'll have never experienced or felt it. I had no idea that the state that I live in now was a state humans were capable of. And there's probably even better ones. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else, just saying that I couldn't envision where I am now as a result of the stuff in this book until I felt it. And so I kind of wrote this book for myself when I was 19 years old, because the amount of hate and anger and struggle and suffering and all the negative stuff that I waded through unnecessarily, I just didn't have tools.
Right.
And I thought it was going to be a lot of work, and it's work, but it's not as much work as it used to be, because we have enough science to tell us, do this, don't do that. So my wish is that if you're young or you have younger kids, just get that reset process. It's just there in the book. And just do it on the biggest things that push your buttons. And you'll just wake up after you do that and go, wow, maybe the world's better than I thought it was. And I don't have to drive a wreck all the time, because now I can see that it's a wreck.
That's so well said. And there's one thing that I want to touch on before we stop, because it is such a profound reality in our lives right now. I do want to finish up by talking about this algorithmic hijacking. You mentioned quickly doom scrolling earlier. Talk about algorithmic hijacking and what you say about it in the book.
Dopamine is a kind of famous neurotransmitter, and it rewards you for, when it's healthy, for effort, for working towards a goal. But you get these little dopamine rewards from doom scrolling, and it's by design, the same way we would design a gambling to be more addictive. It's actually very similar to gambling. And what this means is it's depleting your dopamine, and you just get hijacked where you just fall into this because your brain's getting these little stimulus things, and you don't feel the dopamine hit. It just feels like a desire to do more. And one of the techniques that you would just never expect was related to this that's in Heavily Meditated is something called bicep. And it's not this bicep on your arm. By the way, that's caffeine on my arm.
Right.
It's not the bicep and arm. It's brief, intentional, conscious exposure to pain. And it turns out in the 14th century, monks would flog themselves on their back in the morning.
Right.
And I thought, it's because they think they're such sinners, they hate themselves. That's not why they did it. And then yogis would lay on beds of nails. And my teacher said, that's to prove they're good yogis. The yogis aren't competing with each other. That's not what they're about. And Texans, we eat our jalapenos and our spicy peppers, and biohackers like me will get in ice water that doesn't feel very good for 3 minutes. And for anyone listening, get in a cold shower for 1 minute every morning. Turns out, if you intentionally do something that's uncomfortable for just 1 to 3 minutes during the day, it resets the sensitivity of dopamine in your brain by up to 250%. What that means, it takes less dopamine to reward you for effort. So it takes less motivation to go to the gym, less motivation to eat healthy, less motivation to do the reset process, and it makes doom scrolling less addictive.
And define doom scrolling for people as you use it.
Doom scrolling is this idea you look at your phone, and every time you see something that's disastrous, that's negative, it kind of sucks you in more and more. And it turns out, because our brains look for fear before we look for love, because fear is dangerous, you have to act now, and love, you can wait a little while if you need to. It's normal and it's a good survival thing. They're hijacking that survival thing. So doom scrolling is the algorithm feeding you things that are negative because they keep squirting out dopamine and getting your attention by triggering little bits of fear and anxiety and comparison. So you just keep scrolling because it's truly addictive. And when you can break that cycle by fixing your dopamine, it changes everything.
By the way, there is internal research from these major companies that they know if they show you something that upsets you emotionally, and this includes your children, that they are more likely to stay online longer, click more often, and go down the rabbit hole deeper, longer, and more intensively than if they show them something that makes them feel good. If it gets them emotionally invested, and they are well aware that that creates emotional disequilibrium, deregulation. It's not good. It creates anxiety and depression, but that's what the algorithm does because it keeps them engaged. So you really have to be cognizant of how much time your kids are spending on these social media platforms, because they are showing them what they will click on, and what they click on is what upsets them and gets them emotionally engaged. So it's true they may start out watching cute kittens play in a basket, but they won't stay involved with that near as long as they will stay involved with something that upsets them and gets them emotionally invested. So that is definitely a problem. And we've talked about that a lot, and it creates all kinds of problems. So it's terrible that they're putting profit ahead of our kids' mental and emotional health, but that's just the reality.
It's the reality. And the people who are doing that, they're narcissists and sociopaths. They're doing it out of their own trauma too. And they're saying money matters more than kindness to other people. And as we work on really upgrading everyone and creating a world where so many of us are emotionally well-regulated, that kind of trickery will lose its power. And the only way we can change it is by changing ourselves.
Yeah, for absolute sure. Well, listen, I've taken too long. And interestingly enough, we've barely scratched the surface in the things that we need to talk about here. The book is heavily meditated. The Fast Path to Remove Your Triggers, Dissolve Stress, and Activate Inner Peace by Dave Asprey. He has written a number of books that you will see on his backlist, all of them bestsellers and very thought-provoking, and most importantly, understandable and action-oriented. You're not going to read this book and say, that's good theory, that's good philosophy. You're going to read this book and you're going to come away and say, I can identify some immediate things I can do that are going to change my quality of life and the quality of life of those around me. There are things I can do starting right now, today, that are going to change my quality of life mentally, emotionally, physically, socially, spiritually, for myself and those around me. And that's a pretty big statement. I make it in an unqualified fashion. So I highly recommend this is a book that you read. I said starting out, I think you're going to treat it first as a book and second as a manual that you'll go back to, because he puts verbs in his sentences and it's a real how-to. And congratulations on the book, Dave. I think it is, I think it absolutely is your best. I know it won't be your last, but I think it is your best. I hope we can talk again.
Anytime.
You're close by. I hope you'll come into the studio at Envoy and we can sit down and have some guests that we can talk to and dive into this even further.
I would be honored to do that. Absolutely. Couple-hour drive. And thank you just from my heart for the kind words on Heavily Meditated. It's all books are a labor of love. This is a big one, and thank you for seeing it.
Well, I appreciate that, and we will be in touch, and we will talk again soon. I look forward to meeting you in person.
Likewise.
All right, thank you so much. We'll say goodbye for today, and I'll see everybody very soon. Thanks so much.